Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So I think they've already, taken the liberty to introduce me. So I'm part of the IBM Research family, based here in Johannesburg. We are a twin location site for IBM Research. We have the Research Lab in Joburg as well as in Nairobi, Kenya. So pleasure to be with you this morning. My task today, what I will try to do is to just take you through some of the recent advances and some of the planned developments when it comes to quantum computing from an IBM perspective, as well as reflect on some of the activities that we're currently engaged in when it comes to growing a productive research ecosystem in South Africa. Our core mission as IBM when it comes to quantum computing specifically is to bring useful quantum computing to the world. And that really speaks to the development of quantum computers that are able to run experiments that that have relevance in terms of real application for enterprises. We do quite get involved in terms of the scientific community where there's really rigorous testing and looking at various algorithms, trying to push the needle when it comes to quantum computing, moving from the phase that we're currently in when it comes to quantum computing, which is the utility phase, really trying to identify use cases where we can leverage these systems to a point where we're really looking at releasing a large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computer that would be used by enterprises more generally. The second aspect to it has to do with the encryption. So we do know that once these fault-tolerant quantum computers become available, we will have a challenge when it comes to encryption. And so there's a body of work that is being done not only by IBM, but also other organizations that is looking at, how do we start to develop post-quantum encryption standards, but also when it comes to enterprises, really looking at the IT stack of various enterprises and looking at where there are vulnerabilities from an encryption perspective and starting to migrate or advise organizations to migrate towards post-encryption standards and implementing those within the environments. I'm not going to dwell on this, but the whole point, as Mervyn was reflecting, classical high-performance computers, etc., those systems are not going away. So the point of view from an IBM perspective is we do have a class of problems, complex problems that are really beyond what we have currently, whether you're looking at leveraging high performance plus AI capabilities, it still remains that these problems, remain intractable. And one can divide them into two groups, really. First, you have problems where the processes themselves are inherently quantum in nature, so follow the laws of quantum mechanics quite closely. And we see these quite significantly in the areas of materials. And so there's various work that has been done to look at, problems in the quantum chemistry space, for example. And then you have a class of problems with really complex structures. And the thesis is that for these problems, even with being able to leverage high-performance computers, as well as some of the computing capabilities that we get from in terms of AI, we are still not able to solve these problems in a way that is cost efficient. And also there is an argument that there are gains when it comes to accuracy when you start to look at certain aspects of these problems and leverage quantum computers to solve some of them. We've seen this work being done in the space of machine learning specifically, where the machine learning pipeline can be broken down where certain components of it, specifically in the component around optimization, could be isolated to then be process within a quantum computing environment. And so you start to see gains in accuracy. Specifically, they've proven that in the context of trying to identify anomalies specifically, and that's a problem that you typically face in the space of finance, etc. Now, there are two prerequisites from our perspective for bringing quantum computing to the world. Specifically, one, you need to develop platforms that scale beyond classical computation. So this means both the processors, but also starting to think about, your novel architectures and systems that would then go into data centers and be able to inhibit the space alongside your classical high performance compute. And so there's thinking and work that is being done from a hardware perspective to look at, all these various challenges from an engineering perspective as well, starting from the scale of the chips themselves, right up onto how do we develop data centers that would be able to leverage the best of both, your quantum systems as well as your classical systems. And then the other thing is you also need a network of enterprises as well as academic institutions. And that's because, as I pointed out in my earlier slide, there's still a lot of work to really identify problems where we can sufficiently say, it's worth deploying quantum computers on these specific problems. So there's a lot of work both in terms of identifying a class of problems that can be solved and where it is cost efficient to deploy quantum systems on these problems. And then secondly, there's a lot of work that is being done in themselves. As we know, the current systems there's still challenges in terms of noise, and there's a lot of work that needs to go into looking at error mitigation techniques and pushing the envelope towards really starting to see a class of algorithms that we can start to really say that we are demonstrating advantage when it comes to specific classes of problems. Right now, as of 2023, we confidently labeled the period as the era of quantum utility. And that was really because of the push that IBM was quite involved in terms of developing the quantum processor and pushing the envelope there to a point where we have more than 100 qubits in a quantum chip, for example. And so we've distinctly, one of the terminologies that we're currently using right now to distinctly separate, some of the devices that were deployed that had less than 100 qubits, we're using the term for these to be quantum devices, and then the term quantum computers to speak to the systems that we've really released, where we've deployed chips that are of more than 100 qubits, and it's specifically in the space of the deployment of the Heron processor, which is about 156 qubit in terms of its how big it is, and then with 5,000 gates in terms of its depth, we're able to demonstrate that there are experiments that can be run where we can comfortably say that we are really starting to see results beyond what can be achieved using brute force methods on a classical computer. So typically using your simulation approaches. And so we're able to demonstrate that in one of the papers that was released in 2023. And so we've continued to innovate in terms of the Heron processor itself, pushing innovations in terms of the error mitigation properties. One of the focus for specifically this era between 2025 up till 2028 is really trying to push the gates up to about 15,000 gates. And we've also demonstrated the industry leading when it comes to coherence times, significant improvements when it comes to our 2-qubit gate coupling, which is one of the innovations that we've also unveiled in the past year. And we've also demonstrated through the Heron chip specifically, really the ability for large system performance, and we've been able to track that tracking performance across 100 qubit chains. So those are some of the innovations related to this particular chip that have enabled a whole, let's say, it's not a whole hive, but it has enabled a lot of researchers as well as industry partners to really look at various problems where we can start to look and perform experiments and start to showcase that we are able to say that for those experiments, we are able to see gains when we use systems beyond what we can. Is we're focusing quite intently on 100+ qubit systems and software at the moment. We also quite focus on to execute on the current circuits with higher accuracy. So that's from, really the hardware, trying to push as much as possible from the hardware perspective. And then the other side, which is looking more on the applications perspective, we're really interested in mapping problems to quantum circuits. So a lot of work going into developing algorithms as well as starting to apply those in industry applications. So for the two groups of problems specifically, so these would be, the group with quantum chemistry, material science, those problems would fall into the space of problems that we call inherently quantum in nature. And so there's been some work that has been released where we've showed unprecedented accuracy, leverage our current Heron processor specifically. And then the other suite of problems that I also talked about, which is more focused around problems with really complex structures, trying to find hidden patterns in these structured problems. So some of our teams have done some work on this. On the classical side, we tried to look at, so we were looking at gene expression data, and we were trying to find complex correlation structures within these data. So it was inspired from a quantum perspective because the interest was on quantum topological data analysis. We've subsequently, developed an approach which is called weighted topological data analysis. It's still a classical algorithm, but one of the things that we're looking at is trying to extend this particular algorithm into the quantum space, specifically looking at QTDA. But the challenge that we were trying to address is we know that in gene expression data, there are hidden complex correlation structures. So what can we do? What other algorithms do we need to develop to be able to exploit those for the purpose of looking at various applications? So we were interested in the problem of classification, and so the development of the methods was tailored or targeted towards that. But there's a lot of activities that is going on in this space specifically. One of the areas is around optimization. And so there's some work that has been done in the space of multi-objective optimization, which is looking at sampling diverse set of solutions and being able to sample that quickly. One of the areas that we are looking at is, how do we leverage, let's say, your state-of-the-art machine learning approaches to provide you with initial values that you can then use, that you can then use within the context of your quantum optimization routine instead of having random starts when it comes to optimization. So that is work that we are looking at doing as a South Africa lab. But this is an area of active research, both from a core science perspective, but also in terms of applications with various industry partners. And then the second space is in the space of differential equations. One of the examples here is, so that the core focus is really trying to find new ways to solve partial differential equations. So one of the areas that we were quite interested in from some of the work that we're doing in the climate and sustainability perspective has been trying to develop. So we've worked in the space of looking at probabilistically inspired machine learning approaches. But one of the areas that we're looking at the moment is, can we look at leveraging or developing end-to-end quantum algorithms that could be applicable in the space of weather and climate prediction. So that's an active area of research that we also currently involved in. What I've shown here is some of the work that has come out of some of the partnerships that we have globally. And so, if this is an area of interest, you can have a look at that. And then another area that we're quite actively involved in is in terms of quantum machine learning, which is really about trying to apply quantum techniques to improve machine learning performance. So one of the challenges in this space has been, the criticism that a lot of the, let's say, problems that we're looking at from a quantum machine learning perspective, if you look at it's data-driven approaches, right? So if you look at the data generation mechanism for some of those processes that are being studied, it's not something that is inherently quantum. And so there has been a bit of, criticism on the ability to then apply machine learning approaches or quantum machine learning approaches in the space where, the feeling is that from a purist perspective, the data generation process is not inherently quantum. So some of the work that our team has been doing here has been in terms of looking at, in the space of biology, so healthcare related work. So they are looking at developing end-to-end hybrid classical quantum machine learning pipelines. They are looking at identifying anomalous patterns when it comes to breast tissue images, and then also being able to leverage gene expression data in order to classify, anomalous tissue from healthy or benign tissues. So early findings in terms of the work that we've been involved in. So the team did develop a graph neural network inspired architecture for the end-to-end quantum classical approach. So when they developed these methods, they tried to approach it both from a perspective of being able to simultaneously, do end-to-end training, and they compared this with an approach where they serially trained their models. So meaning that they first trained their models to extract embeddings from a normal machine learning approach, so applying a GNN, and then extracting those embeddings to map onto quantum circuit when they were then implementing a VQC approach. What they did find was that they were able to prove that end-to-end training performed significantly better than serially trained models. And the other thing that they did find was that if they were able to compress, so quantum compression via amplitude encoding, they were able to significantly improve, qubit requirements without the loss of information. So those are some of the work that has been produced, specifically leveraging the current systems that we have to really try to prove that we do have a suite of problems that we can apply quantum computers to, and that the requirements for solutions to those problems are beyond what can be covered by running these on a classical simulators. Then the next frontier, when it comes to specifically looking at addressing problems using quantum computer, is the frontier around trying to get to quantum advantage. Now, again, here, two routes are clearly, as we're starting to see work come out and there's claims of quantum advantage, they can be separated into two groups. The first group really has to do with what is work that is going on in the applications arena. So with a lot of the partners where it's data-driven approaches and really starting to say for a class of problems, we're starting to see some results that seem to point towards advantage. Now, the claims of advantage are it's still quite early, and so there's a lot of debates, and also a lot of debates around just whether that is true or not. So it's falsifiable claims essentially, and so. But there is work that is currently coming out where partners are starting to point out towards, advantage specifically. And some of the second group of problems is more what we see with some of our partners from national laboratories. These are more rigorous kind of like experiments being done from a scientific perspective. And so in terms of the scale of these experiments, they may not be, they still can be put classified as toy models, so as to say. But through some of this work, what has been able to come out of it is really starting to outline what are the prerequisites or criteria against which to judge whether a particular solution for a particular problem, whether one can claim quantum advantage. And so it's been important work from that perspective. Now, quantum advantage, one of the key things when it comes to that is in the execution of the information processing task on quantum hardware, two criteria needs to be satisfied. One, the correctness of the output needs to be rigorously validated. And then secondly, the calculation that is performed with the quantum system needs to be sufficiently separate. So there needs to be a clear demonstration of superior efficiency or cost effectiveness or accuracy beyond what can be achieved by classical methods. And so some of the work that has been done in terms of establishing some of these criteria has been really released recently. It's a kind of framework for quantum advantage. So because the key thing is we have to be able to validate or establish trust in the outcome of the computation that has been done. So one of the things is, how do we trust the observables that have been estimated? So we have to be able to have provable confidence bounds, and especially because for some of these experiments, there isn't, a single kind of like ground truth, so as to say. And so an important thing is to have provable confidence bounds. The second thing is just based on the variational principle, is we have to guarantee upper bounds on ground state energies. And so this is, one of the other criteria that has been put out there. And then the third criteria has been around, being able to prove peaking of circuits. And the work that has been recently released is a tracker that enables, various groups who are claiming, that their experiments as proof of quantum advantage, they are able to submit their work in this tracker, and then be able to gauge, how they are doing relative to others that are on the path of trying to prove quantum advantage. This was work that is a collaboration between IBM, and it has been released, so it's available on open source and can be used by the community at large. When it comes to the technology itself, we have both a development roadmap as well as an innovation roadmap. The development roadmap really aims to track the release of our hardware and software and some of the innovations that we are developing when it comes to specifically software, which is an important component in terms of the interface with the user community specifically. And then the second component is what we are doing from an innovation perspective. And so some of this work ends up as proof of concepts that are not really released externally, but all of the effort is towards improving or moving towards what we had committed to in as far as our commitments, both from a hardware and software perspective. In 2025, obviously, we're still in an era where we have our Heron chip in a lot of our data centers, and it has provenly really proved useful in terms of being able to, in the running of some of the experiments that we've seen both from a utility scale perspective and starting to migrate towards advantage. But there's still a lot of work that is going on in the background to address issues of noise. And so a lot of innovations around error mitigation, both from an algorithmic and hardware improvements perspective. A key focus for the next 4 years, so as to say, taking us up to 2028, would be pushing, the envelope when it comes to our processors. And so currently with Heron, we have 156 qubits with 5,000 gates in terms of depth. That will be pushed all the way to 15,000 gates when it comes to Nighthawk, but keeping the qubits relatively, in terms of the growth, relatively modest. So Nighthawk will be the platform that really will be full on exploring quantum advantage ahead of the release of the large-scale fault-tolerant computer. And I think the key thing about Nighthawk has just been in terms of the change in the architecture within the processor itself, leveraging the lattice architecture, which enables more connections, so pushing the number of operations that can be done on these systems. A key point and some of the developments is towards, in 2033, Blue Jay, a full-on data center that is going to be developed with a system capable of running circuits with 1 billion gates on 2,000 qubits. So this would be the era beyond 2029, which we've earmarked as our era for releasing enterprise level fault-tolerant quantum computing. So there's a lot of developments, both from an engineering perspective, building out this data center. And so there's a lot of excitement to really see what if we can achieve this particular target where we have a system with more than 1 billion gates. Then this just shows a picture of what we're doing in terms of both the software and the orchestration layer. So closer interfacing with the users. And so from an algorithms perspective, this is an important developments for us. And so in terms of from an algorithms perspective, there's a push to look at applications and developing both algorithms and identifying applications where we can start to see demonstrable advantages of quantum computers. And then there's a lot of work that is going on in the background in terms of the orchestration layer, so that there's efficiency, there's interoperability. One of the things that we recently released has been the API that enables, the community that are traditionally coding in C++ environments to be able to, leverage the Qiskit environment without having to change the underlying C-based code. Okay, I'm going to move on quickly in terms of this one. I want to get to the innovation roadmap. So a key thing about the innovation roadmap, so these are, the innovation roadmap is really about pushing the boundaries. And so some of it is not, products that we release externally or capabilities that we release externally. So some of it does end up being proof of concepts internally. One of the key things that we're driving hard towards is in terms of the coupling architectures. So Loon specifically, where we will be featuring a new chip architecture with C couplers to link qubits beyond nearest neighbors. So this architecture specifically, one will be able to look at connectivity up to 6 degrees. And this is important specifically as we look at scalable error correcting code in order to outperform what we currently have at the moment. So a lot of this was recently, some of the developments around this were recently announced at the Quantum Developer Conference that happened a few weeks ago, and there's still more work that the teams are doing in terms of the architecture itself. And then when it comes to software innovations, the focus has been on, for the previous 2 years, one, enabling AI-enhanced quantum, the HPC quantum integration, and then there's now the push towards error correction decoders, so that has been achieved, but then starting to look at accelerating, workflows that streamline execution for known advantage workflows. Specifically, when it comes to software, in 2026, the aim is to demonstrate the first example of quantum advantage using quantum computers in an HPC environment. And so that is a deadline that is etching quite closely. Just to wrap up in terms of the evolution, 2025, we've been able to demonstrate, quantum-centric data centers where we have Qiskit and HPC capabilities. This is specifically with our Fugaku data center at the Riken Institute. And then in 2026, the aim is to demonstrate quantum advantage. So teams that are working on algorithms and applications are pushing quite hard on this. Demonstrate a viable path towards error-corrected quantum computer. So again, there's a lot of efforts that is going into error mitigation techniques and algorithms. And so that would be an important milestone as we push towards fault-tolerant quantum computers. And then in 2028, to actually demonstrate the first error-corrected quantum computer ahead of releasing then an enterprise scale grade fault-tolerant quantum computer. When it comes to the innovation centers, Mervyn already touched a bit on that. Quantum innovation centers, we really see them as important vehicles for driving regional and national leadership when it comes to quantum computing. And so the core areas there are, first, from a research and development perspective, bringing the community together in terms of experimentation. So advancing the science, advancing experimentation when it comes to utility and advantage. And then, there's also a very closely tied in link to that, which is around workforce enablement, specifically in the research community, because there's a lot of effort that goes into then driving education activities so that your cohort of researchers that are interested in this area to a level where they are able to, run their own experiments and start to look at questions that are of interest to them independently. And then when we're looking at quantum as a tool, so this has to do with access, so being able to access quantum systems, but not only that, also starting to build on top of this. So there are opportunities to develop, whether it's functions and can be contributed in the community in the form of K-state functions, being able to address certain problems in terms of the technology stack itself and being able to contribute that. One of the examples that I can give in that is WITS were quite at the forefront in terms of pushing environment, and that was something that was actually showcased at the Quantum Summit, I think in 2024, yes. And so there's opportunities to also start to look at how do we contribute and lead developments when it comes to quantum computing, building on top of the stack or access that we have access to in the form of IBM quantum computers. This is just giving you a view in terms of the past couple of years of establishment of quantum innovations in South Africa. So started in 2019 with Wits University, and currently the Quantum Innovation Center is now with the CHPC CSIR. The mission remains the same, to drive a community of really thriving quantum researchers and practitioners that are African-based, to really start to see a pipeline of growth when it comes to students, both masters and PhD, that are studying towards quantum computing, and to establish South Africa as a leader when it comes to quantum computing on the continent and beyond. And so, yeah, I think this is just giving you a view of what has been achieved so far when it comes to the previous work that was done both with the Wits University, including involvement in the South African Quantum Technology Initiative strategy document, the drafting of that. Some of the researchers from the IBM lab were quite involved in that. And so it's been great to see the growth of the community itself. We do a lot of work in terms of facilitating training, specifically beginning all the way back in 2021, where we were hosting quantum challenges, summer schools, to really get drive awareness of quantum computing, but also to start to grow a cohort of students that are interested in research in this area. We continue to host monthly now. We used to have them bi-weekly quantum meetups, where we use that as a platform for sharing some of the advances when it comes to quantum computing in the region. And then this is just showing you some of the activities that we've been driving together with this CHPC for most of this year. I think the highlight probably being part of the proceedings in the Foundational Digital Capabilities Research Conference, featuring in Deep Learning Indaba X and Indaba in Kigali, as well as some of the recent workshops that we've had at AIMS, where we delivered a KISS-KIT workshop, and it would be great to see AIMS also becoming part of the community with Sakuti that is accessing computes through the CHPC. I think, yeah, from my end, that is it. And I think I would really encourage you to, if you're quite curious about what IBM is doing in terms of quantum computing, also the research that has been done, you can visit some of these resources that I've shared here. And I want to thank you.
Dr. Makhanya, that was incredibly impressive. Thank you very much.
Oh, I just need to see you. Sorry.
We've got a few minutes for questions. We've got 7 minutes. So let me go to the Q&A. Ronald says, what minerals or metals are required for quantum computing components, i.e. chips, etc.?
It's
a good question.
A good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I actually never looked into the actual minerals. But the specific technology that we went with when it comes to our chips is superconducting qubits. So that's the technology that we went into. But yeah,
Okay.
Interesting question. Sorry, I don't have that answer offhand.
Okay. What I was thinking is shouldn't Africa have a quantum computer, for joint use?
That'll be great. And I know there is some work that is going on within the community that is looking at, developing hardware. I know specifically at WITS, there are some professors that have a focus on that. And I think it would be great if we can push in that direction. But I think even in terms of, the quantum systems that are out there, like the IBM quantum systems, we've seen various countries like from Germany, Poland, etc., that have really pushed to invest in getting a quantum system that would be, in country, so as to say. And I think if we were to move in that direction, I think that'll be really helpful. For now, we do have access through cloud, and we get resources from Europe or from North America. But still, when you start to think about really sovereignty and having kind of like more control in terms of access, but also data protection not issues, but data protection policies, etc. I think, as the use of these systems become more pervasive and as we start to look at perhaps more sensitive areas when it comes to research, it would be a good idea to start to think about, can we have a system that can be based on the continent?
Very interesting. Thank you. There's a question from Lulamile. Do we have the Heron processor available in the country?
No, we don't we don't have one available in the country. As I said, for the current access that we have through our QICs, we are accessing, resources from data centers that are in Europe and in the US. And so the Heron processors are in those locations. We don't have a physical one in country.
Okay. Thank you. Let me see if there are any hands up. If you want to ask a question, please put your virtual hand up. That says raise hand at the bottom of your screen. I was interested in your youth outreach. Were you aiming that at university students?
Yeah, so we go ahead, sorry.
Or younger at school level?
Interesting question. Actually, we have been in conversation with the MIT because they run a quantum mechanics. Almost for them, for us it's summer. They run a quantum mechanics summer school, so as to say, for high schoolers in South Africa. And so one of the things that we have been in conversation about is our interest in getting involved in that from a practical perspective. For a lot of our education, it is tailored more towards university students, but there have been cases where we've had high school students that have gone through and taken the education from the IBM Quantum Learning Platform, and so we're able to cope with the material and start to contribute to Qiskit, etc. And so it's not that it's not something that is within reach specifically for high school students. It's just our focus has been more on university level students and specifically postgraduate students to try and drive growth in terms of the research ecosystem when it comes to quantum computing. But it's an interesting one, and they're starting to do it in other regions as well, where they have, whether it's a challenge or a summer school that is geared specifically for high school learners.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you a bit more about that. We have some student programs that we run and also career information. And we have not focused on this as a career area at all. So ICT in general, all kinds of computer jobs, but we haven't been really aware, sensitized to this as an exciting career trajectory.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thought, especially coming from from your end, because if we look at the developments, there's an acceleration, whether it's IBM Quantum or it's some of the competitors, Google, etc. There's certainly an acceleration towards releasing more of these quantum systems for broader use. And so the question then becomes, do we have a workforce and a pipeline of professionals that would be able to leverage both your classical and quantum compute? And we've been trying to drive it more from really at the high-end skills level, so driving at your postgrad and trying to raise awareness and interest in learning quantum computing. But I think the thought that you're having, that should we start to have these conversations at even a high school level, because it has to do with, what are some of the prerequisites, for example, and so what are some of the subjects that are important to stress if we're looking to develop a workforce that would be able to gain skills in quantum computing and then become professionals in the area. But certainly there's now, besides quantum, computational research scientists, you're starting to get quantum developers, for example. So we've had for a couple of years now what we call a Qiskit developer certificate, where individuals can go through learning from our learning platform and start to use practically learn how to program in Qiskit, and then go through the path of actually taking on the certification by demonstrating the ability to actually program in a program a quantum computer specifically. So there's already those things that are available, and that we need to just raise awareness about. Yes, nobody is going to hire you today in South Africa as a quantum developer, but it's very possible that in the next, within the next decade, that might be a skill that we really need in the country.
Right. That's soon. Yeah. Sibusisiwe, thank you very, very much. That was fascinating and really a presentation to revisit and to try and get one's mind around. So thank you very much. And we have to unfortunately move along on the program. And we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you.